have a treat where today Intel is helping to support Academic Effectiveness Committee, and we are excited to have Maegan, Joyce, and Taryn here to share a little bit about rubrics. So I'll let you guys take it over.
All right, so I'm going to start us off, and then Joyce will go ahead and chime in, and Maegan is going to then add in about some of the logistics of doing these on Blackboard. So yeah, just a little bit of a history here. As my job as Director of Academic Effectiveness, one of the things the committee does is review everybody's SLARs, those student learning assessment reports, and with the new majors being created, we also have been getting assessment plans for the new majors. And one of the things that's become apparent to the committee is that not everybody knows how to make a good rubric. And so as we talked during the committee, and actually I'm really glad Marielle is here because she's sort of been our bridge because she's on both AEC and Intel this year. So we were like, well, wait, this also could help people with teaching. So why don't we talk to Intel about this? And so our goal is to talk about some of the things that worked for us in terms of building rubrics, and then also sort of lessons learned and things that haven't worked for us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And actually, the first thing that will pop up is actually something that Joyce created, not me. So this is an example of a rubric that was presented by Joyce as part of the assessment plan for the Honors College. And we have gotten her permission and shared this as her whole plan as a nice example of how to implement things. And so that's one of the reasons why I asked Joyce to be on this presentation, is because I knew that she had a really nice foundation in these. And so again, this is where our ideas came from, because some of the times what will happen, and I have been completely guilty of this myself before, is we'll just get rubrics that don't have anchors, that don't have, sort of these numbers in terms of how are you going to rate things. We'll get rubrics that might have anchors but don't have descriptions that would sort of guide how you would rate things. And so we were sort of like, I don't know if people know they're supposed to do that. So again, that's one of the reasons why we decided this might be a good idea to have something about it. So the first thing I will actually show as my sort of show and tell is the ones that we use for the psych department for assessment. And so this first one I'm showing we use not only for our capstone original research project, but also now for the oral presentations they give as part of our capstone seminar. We're still tweaking it so it works for both. As you'll see as we look at this, it's not quite something that's that flexible. But I believe it was this one when I first got it, when I was using it myself, and then when I was chair of the department, Rich Bond, who was in the role of, let me try to remember his full title, Chief Assessment something, it's not officer, administrator for academic programs. It's like CAAAAAP. But he came to me as psych department chair and was like, you need descriptors here. And I was like, oh, yeah, that would help, right? And so like you see here, we have written, detailed descriptors, so it's easy for us to do this. Another thing that we tweaked is that we also have one for the paper they write, and these used to be on different metrics. So it used to be that I believe this one was 1 to 5, and then the oral one was like 0 to 4, and just moving something like that can be really helpful. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, my memory is coming back into place. It was actually this one that existed without descriptors. So I had to go in and create descriptors for each of the points, and sort of what does it mean to be doing really well at citing appropriate evidence versus what does it mean to be doing poorly at that, right? So that makes it easy for us to do this. And then one thing I'll point out here are these are rubrics that we do fill out for our seniors, but they don't go into the grade, right? So if someone gets, I don't know, a 3 or more on everything, it doesn't mean that their grade will equate to a 70, right? And so these are more for our department. We always tell students, we do share these with the students so they know what we're looking for. And we tell them these are our ways of assessing us. And then your grade is our way of assessing you. So that's just something as well that we have used and want to make that clear for folks too. Then I wanted to share with you sort of how I've taken this knowledge from, again, being department chair and working on these and applied it to my own teaching. So again, as I've mentioned, I've always used rubrics, but sometimes they've been, and I don't think I have a copy of any of these pulled up, but just literally like blank out of 20 for this part of the project. It's more like an outline than a rubric. So fully confessing that I am not always perfect in things, right? And totally admitting that. All right, I'm just gonna move my little bar here just so I can click on some of my other things. So I've been using these in my classes in a couple different ways here. So this is for my introductory women's and gender studies course. And I have moved to the final project for them being an infographic, which they end up being really fun to look at. They have to research a topic related to women and gender and create something eye-catching that gets their points across in an effective way. So it's a different way of communicating that I think is pretty practical and applied, and things that, if they choose to go to a nonprofit or, even companies that work on these issues, they might have to engage with something like this. And so here you'll see, in addition to having, anchors for being not great all the way up to being excellent, I also have an absent. And this is something that I include in all of my grading rubrics, and I'm sure no one else has run into this, right? But there are times when you give them an assignment or a take-home essay and they just skip an entire piece of it, right? And you're just like, well, you didn't answer this part of the question. So I need to have a 0 there as well, and just sort of descriptor for that. And again, similarly, in addition to using this to grade, I also shared this with the students so that they knew what I was looking for. And in fact, this is just my Blackboard page. I have this just posted along with the instructions and the links to how to make an infographic and things along those lines. So everything's in one place and they can find it. And so here you can see, again, how I have to tailor these to the project itself, right? So something like use of text, right? So typically if we're looking at a paper, we are going to be really focusing on this, but I have to include things like if you're including too much text, right? So if you have created an infographic, but it just has like 2 pictures and giant paragraphs of text, that's actually not a good infographic, even if your information on there is good, right? Because the whole point of an infographic is to communicate things in that visual way that people can like process very quickly. So again, tailoring that to the assignment. And, going from, the idea that the text is instrumental in explaining the topic, it looks professional, down to you've just stuck a bunch of text on something that's supposed to be visually based, right? And it doesn't work. And so then there's also things about visuals, right? So like you get a 0 if there are no visuals, right? Or if I can't really understand how they're relevant, you're going to get a less good score than if, it's pretty obvious how those things work. And so I had that not only for the infographic itself, but then I also had a separate rubric because they did a brief presentation where they walked us through it. So again, here, even though this is on the same project, I have tailored it to the presentation itself, right? Things like Are they telling a story with their infographic and their presentation? Is it obvious to me what their topic is? One would hope, but we've all had those presentations turn in where you're like, wait, is this 3 topics or 1, right? And then in my last couple minutes here, before I turn it on over to Joyce, I want to share how I've been using rubrics with students. So in addition to, looks like we have something in a chat. It might be a question here. What if certain components are weighted more heavily than others? Ooh, that's a really good question, Jen. And that's a really great thing that I think that Maegan can show us when we go into Blackboard. But yeah, in that case, I would just have different anchors at the top. And so, for example, yeah, that's actually pretty common. This is an uncommon one that everything is equally weighted, but oftentimes I might have, that like the visuals might be weighted more. And in that case, I would just have, like within the box, like, okay, this is worth 1 to 2 points or 1 to 4 points, things along those lines. And that's actually easier to do on Blackboard than it is in this case. So I'm not going to steal Maegan's thunder, but she'll be able to show you how to do some of that. And Joyce has an example, which is great too. So the last thing I'm going to show you is one of the things I have my students do in participation-based classes, again, particularly in my gender-related classes, but also in things like our capstone ethics and professional issues course, which is entirely discussion-based, is I actually have students rate their own participation at midterm and final, where they'll actually fill out a rubric and give themselves a grade on these various areas. And then based on filling out the rubric, actually give themselves a letter grade and explain why they would give that grade. And usually what I do is I just pass this out in class. They read it over, they circle things, and then they give themselves the grade and give the explanation. And one of the things I want to point out here is that one of the things I've had to tweak because of past experiences is that, you would think an F is just not contributing, but unfortunately I've had some past experiences where people just like talk over everybody else the whole class. And I had to point out that like, that is also failing, right? That part of the discussion class is learning how to interact. So then I was teaching psychology of gender in spring 2020. And sort of around the time I would have them fill this out, we had to go all remote. And I was like, how am I going to do this? And there are ways to build this into Blackboard. But what I found was actually the easiest was to put it in a Google form. And so I went ahead and just put those questions with the anchors into a Google form. And then giving them the places to give themselves descriptions of those. And then if you're not familiar with Google Forms, that's a whole other thing. But essentially what happens then is you can have the responses populate into a Google form. And I'm going to close this real quick to not have any FERPA violations, but essentially then I can see everything in one place. I can use that as I give them their participation grade. And so the students can also engage with that. Oh, that's a really good question. So Marielle, what I do is it's a communication thing with them. So they turn it in and then I give them feedback when I post the grade in Blackboard, or if they, the traditional old way, I would like write it on their form and turn it back to them. So I use their grade as a jumping off point, but then, if they're being unrealistic one way or the other, I give them feedback on that. Like if they've given themselves an A and they've talked one class, the first half of the class, I give them that feedback. Like, no, you're not actually contributing. I would love to hear you talk more. And then you might all experience this too. What I often experience with my good students is they'll be like giving themselves a B and they're like, I only talk once a class sometimes, right? And so then I'll give them feedback like, no, you're actually making really great contributions, tying them to the reading, things along those lines, right? So then I will give them a higher grade. Perhaps they give themselves a B, I give themselves an A. So yeah, it becomes a conversation that hopefully they can learn from. All right, so I want to make sure I give Joyce and Maegan enough time. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to them. But I'm loving your questions so far already. And Joyce is going to go next.
All right, so my task today was to give you a little bit of guidelines on how to design some effective rubrics. And as Taryn mentioned, I've had some experience doing this both for teaching, but also for assessment. And so one of the things I want to mention is that you can design a rubric that could be used both to evaluate the student assignment, right, your artifact in a class for a grade, but also use part or all of that also for assessment. So in assessing in your programs. We do this in our capstone course in chemistry, and I'm sure other programs do it as well. You could also have, you could be evaluating the same artifact, one for the grade, right, and one for the assessment. And you can make one available to the students to see in Blackboard and the other one not available for the student to see. So you can actually use it for assessment without the students having that information. Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important is how important or how beneficial rubrics can be. If you've never used rubrics before when you've been grading, one of the things that will help you is that it will save you the time that you take when you're grading. You'll actually have to put some time in initially to create the rubric, but once you've created the rubric, it makes grading a lot faster because you don't have to write down what the criteria is that they're missing or where, you know, where they are. You can just circle or select that particular criterion description and why you gave them those points for that particular criteria. And also for me, it helps me be more consistent. So even though I had criteria previously, whenever I designed an assignment, I'd have my learning objectives and I do the criteria and I'd share that with the students to help the students, but I didn't have all the descriptors. And so it took me a little bit longer to grade. And sometimes I wasn't being consistent about what I was, the points, the values I was giving for the different students. So it does help me be a little bit more consistent and objective when I'm grading. And then I don't get as many student questions about why they got the grade that they got because they can see each criteria section, what points they got, and then a brief description of how they did, how they performed with those criteria. And then there are some other benefits to this in that you could use this to assess what the students are learning. And so you could actually make adjustments in your course, which is what AEC would like you to put in your SLARs, right? That you're actually making adjustments as you go. But this is important too, because if you realize that none of them know how to do citations properly, maybe there's like a lesson that you could add into your course where you teach them about the citations that you maybe assume that they got in a different course, for example. And then for students, if you provide them with a rubric ahead of time, and I fully support doing this, being as transparent as possible about how you're going to evaluate them, then they are going to actually prepare a better assignment for you. And that way they also understand how the assignment aligns with the course objectives, because you'll have learning objectives for the assignment as well as for the course. And the students can actually improve because if you have multiple assignments in the semester and you're giving rubric feedback on each assignment, then they can see where they need to work to improve their grade in the future. And they can use the rubric to assess their work before they even turn it in. So when you're designing a rubric, there's three main components, and Taryn used a few of these terms when she was showing her examples. But typically the rows are the criteria or the categories or the factors, whatever you want to call them, that you're measuring or characteristics. And then the columns are typically the performance levels or levels of achievement. This is the range of expected performance that you expect, that you think that you might get from your students. So in an upper level course, you might not have absent like Taryn had. You might have like it's below standard, right? And maybe because if they've turned in the assignment, they've at least done some of the work, right? So you may not have a 0, you might have like a 10 to 5 or something like that. So you have full capability of like changing whatever numbers are that you're assigning to it, the qualitative numbers versus the quantitative. And then the last part is the performance level descriptors. These are the those sentences that were in each of the cells or boxes in the rubric that you saw for the ones that Taryn was showing. These are the observable characteristics that you're actually looking for when you're assessing the paper or the artifact. And so they should address specifically that criteria and how it aligns with the different levels of performance that you're, which cell it's in. So it's an intersection between the criteria and the performance level. So when you're starting to design a rubric, the key point to start is to identify the skills and knowledge that you want the students to demonstrate in the assignment. So this goes back to writing really effective assignments too, right? The more information you give the student about the assignment to begin with, the better that they can actually accomplish what you want them to. So being transparent about your objectives, and then putting those into the rubric so the students know that those objectives are actually being assessed. And it reminds you to make sure that you're actually assessing all those things. So I started doing rubrics very early in my career. They weren't very good ones, but they were like to have the criteria. So I had a half a rubric, I think, is the way I would consider it. And the reason I did was because I realized that sometimes I'd read a paper and the writing was so poor, but the content was there, right? But there were enough grammatical errors, which really bother me. I'm an avid reader, and it really bothers me when I have to sit there and correct a lot of like just simple grammar and comma mistakes, right? And so it was overly biasing my opinion of the content, right? It didn't make the paper unreadable, but there were enough errors right there. I was like, this is sloppy writing. And so I wanted to be more consistent about how I was grading and how many points or what I was contributing to the grammar versus the content, right? And so this allowed me to put a certain value of points to each criteria, which it kind of answers Jen's point that she had earlier. All right, so once you know what you want to assess, right? What are the skills or knowledge that you want to assess because you are expecting them to demonstrate it in the assignment, then you kind of work through these questions. What are the observable criteria that are going to represent those knowledge and skills? So what are those categories that you're going to be grading on? And then how can you best divide those criteria to represent distinct, meaningful levels of achievement or performance? And that will become your columns, right? And then what observable characteristics of the student's work differentiate the different levels of performance? So kind of communicating, right? Verbalizing what you're going to be looking for those different criteria. So, and I don't know how well these are going to show up for you all because the text is pretty small, but this is an example of one from my medicinal chemistry course. So this is a 400 level chemistry course. This is the top half of the rubric because it didn't fit on one slide because I did want to make it readable for you all. But the first two top categories are about the content. And so these are based on 20 points each, and then their analysis. And then again, if my students at this 400 level, if they've turned in the paper, they've at least addressed each of these issues because I tell them to do this, right? So I don't have an absent, but I do have an inadequate. So they only get 50% of the points if they haven't done it well, right? And then the references, how they cite and list their sources is an important part of scientific writing. And so they have to do it with a particular format. And I give them 10 points out of the 100 on the references. So this is an example, Jen, of not everything having equal weighting. And then the writing quality and the writing mechanics, I give 15 points each for each of those. And then this is another example of a rubric that we use for presentations. And so you can see that it's organized into like content or, how they organize the presentation, their knowledge, how do they appear like they know their information well, can demonstrate that they understand it. And then their elocution, their professionalism. And so this is just simple 5 categories, 10 points each, so equally weighted. So I just want to give you 2 examples. And you don't have to have your levels of achievement equally distributed. So it doesn't have to be like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It can be like in this case, if they do things, if they meet the standard, they're going to get 90% in this case, right? But if they approach the standard, so they're below standard, 70%. Sorry, 50% or 70% for those last two categories, just to give you an idea. So I think my 10 minutes up. So I'm going to let Maegan talk a little bit about how you do this in Blackboard. Before she does that, I just want to mention that I do use Blackboard to do a lot of electronic grading. So a couple points along the way, if you are using rubrics, and Maegan's going to show you how you can actually have feedback under each of the different criteria. So if you want to put specific feedback, like if they're not doing the references correctly, I can attach it to that particular criteria. So there's a text box that you can add things. And if you're going to be grading electronically, it's really handy to have a Word document, some sort of word processing document with your comments, because if you do a lot of comments frequently, you may want to just copy and paste them so you don't have to retype them for every student. So if you're grading a lot of students and you have very common errors or common comments that you make, having a Word document that you have can make your electronic grading go even faster. And with that, I will turn it over to Maegan to show us all of the functionality of Blackboard.
Sure. Thanks, Joyce. And feel free to jump in as I go through this. And if you think I missed something that's relevant, I don't mind at all. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay. Everyone can see my screen, right? Great. So there are a couple different ways you can start creating rubrics. You can, within a course, under course tools, you can go down here to rubrics and start creating rubrics or importing rubrics and then later attach them to assignments. Or you can start directly from an assignment. So for example, I will create this new assignment here. Call it writing assignment 2. Write your description in there. You all know what this looks like. And you notice this little box right here where you can either create a new rubric, select a rubric you've already created. So that's an important note to be aware of, is if you do initially create your rubric under course tools, choose select rubric to grab that after and apply it to an assignment. For this example, I'm going to create a new rubric just so that you can see all of the different fields we're talking about here. So I'm just going to call this assignment 2. But there's lots of different options here. So you have your criteria in the first column and levels of achievement in the rows, like you saw on some of Joyce's examples. You can easily change the naming conventions of these with the edit. You can add rows or columns, take them away, as many as you needed. So I'm just going to delete that. But it's going to default to percentages, but you can also do points. You can do ranges, which can be really helpful. And I'll show you how that works on once you're grading on the other end, and how you can take all of that into account. So there's a lot of flexibility in here to allow you to do what works best for your class in the way that you want to give feedback. You can input all of the different descriptors in here. So like Joyce mentioned in her presentation, it can be a lot of work up front, but it's going to save you time in the long run, especially with Blackboard. When you copy your whole course over, the rubrics will copy over. You can also easily import rubrics from one class to another, which I'll show you. So just think of it more as an investment into your future time. So Jen, I think you had the questions about, what do you do if things have certain weights? You can see where you can adjust that here. So maybe I only want that to be 10, and it will automatically balance the weights out for you if you don't get it up to 100. So you can see how that works there. So that's how you create a new one. For the purpose of this, I'm just
Maegan, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, the nice thing is that you can put that in any format you want. So if you want it to be percentage based, you can. If you want it to be points based, you can. So it can work within the way that you grade, which I really like.
Yeah, exactly.
I will add one more thing, Maegan, while you're pulling that up. If I would caution against creating the rubric in the assignment, only because you want to take some time to create your rubric and make sure you've edited it carefully, because once you've deployed an assignment, you cannot change the rubric. So once you've attached it to an assignment and then you've released it to the students, you cannot edit. You can't edit the rubric.
Yes. See, these are all the good use cases that I never run into when I'm just fiddling around and testing the functionality. So thank you for that. So in this example, I'm just going to assign writing assignment 1, which I had previously created, just so that you can see some of the other options. And because I have this set to a points-based rubric and I didn't enter anything in the points possible, it's going to default to the maximum amount of points that was on that rubric. So I'll put that here. And these are another area I want to point out, the options that show up here, because it's, especially this one over here, isn't super obvious to me anyway. So it's defaulting to not show the rubric to students when they're viewing the assignment. So I heard both Joyce and Taryn say, you know, transparency, making sure students are aware of how they're going to be assessed. This would be where you'd probably want to change one of these options. So yes, with rubric scores is going to show them the actual points or percentage as possible at each level. There's the option to do it without it too. If you have a case where that might be more appropriate, or you can choose to only show them the rubric after they've submitted and had everything graded. So those are some options there. So I'm going to say, oh no, I'm going to do yes with rubric scores. Type 2, there's an option to, it's going to default to use as grading for grading, so that when you go into your needs grading section and electronically review that assignment, whatever grade you input as a final result is going to automatically show up in the grade center. If you are using it for more of a secondary evaluation and you don't necessarily want that score to be directly inputted to a Blackboard column, you could use that option there. Blackboard's only going to allow you to use one rubric for grading per assignment. Joyce or Taryn, I didn't know if you had anything else to add or instances where you've used that option.
This is what we were talking about earlier. If you're going to use it for assessment, but not for grading, you may not want the students to see it, right? So if it's for program assessment only.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, so that is how you would do that there. Now let's see what it looks like when you're grading. So I've already kind of queued something up to grade in here. So let me go to Grade Center and Needs Grading. Okay, so this likely will be familiar to you. Don't mind my very lazy assignment submission here, but what I want you to focus on is over here on the right. So it's going to automatically show up with the rubric that I had assigned. Can select this, and this is how it's going to default, where there's only feedback at the final at the end of the form, but Joyce was mentioning providing feedback for each different criteria. So you can do that here, where you can enter notes in for each specific criteria. You can show the descriptions as a reminder for yourself too, but you may just want to see as much as possible on the screen.
This is particularly useful if you're using a range and you don't have descriptors for each of the levels of achievement, right? So if you would just have like 0 to 5 or 0 to 20 for a criteria, right? And you want to specify why they got that, that level score, right? Then putting the feedback attached to the specific criteria is very, very helpful. If you have really good descriptors, you just have to click the number, right? Because then they're getting that descriptor as their feedback.
And then the only other thing I will say about using these is there can be a slight annoyance that if your rubric is lengthy, you might, and you're working on like the first part of the assignment, you kind of have to scroll up and down a little bit. Even with having to do that, having these rubrics in place, then again, as we mentioned at the start, like these will take time up front, right? But it still cuts down on my grading time drastically.
Thank you both. So just for kicks, I'm going to go through and enter all of these, but Notice here how you can, if you need to manually adjust the grade for one reason or another, especially when you're using those different levels, you have the option to do that here too. So I will change it to 9, save. And then here, so I've done the rubric feedback. If you had anything general or you wanted to add an attachment, that could be something that you did there. So then the student would be able to see that when they go in through the My Grade Center. And I can, I'm going to flip to the student preview so that you can see what it looks like on their end and what they saw. Okay, so that has been graded. And do I see a couple chats.
Yeah, Jen, that's what I was just talking about. So if you click for it to show you the descriptors, then you will have to like do the scrolling back and forth a little more, but yeah, you can see them there, which is helpful.
Okay, and I find that not everyone knows about this, so I just want to spend a minute explaining student preview too. So if you're on your Blackboard course, you can enter student preview and it essentially creates a temporary new user in your course where you can then see exactly what students see. You can submit sample assignments to see what's going to happen. So if you're ever, wondering what, how it looks or, things like that, this is one way that you could do that. And I'm happy to answer any questions anyone ever has on it. But let's see. So
Maegan, while you're on the student view, can you show them that, like in the grade book, the rubric, if you made it available for the student before the assessment, it'll actually be there for them to click on it.
Let me make a new assignment real quick and I will do that. But for the preview user, this is the option that comes up when you exit. Usually it's going to delete the preview user and all the data, but I'm going to keep it in this instance because when I go back in, I want that data to be there. But let me go do that really quick. Just assignment. And I'm just doing something very basic. Select, I guess I'll just do the same one. So see how I had entered 10, but then once I associated that rubric, it put it back to the 12. And I want them to see it with the rubric score. So, okay, so now I'm going to go back into my preview user. And for assignment 2, they can see the rubric. So it's very clear exactly how they're going to be assessed.
And they can also see it under their My Grades. It'll show which assignments have rubrics attached to them.
Yep. So here's assignment 1, the one that was graded. So when they click in here, I think I have to go here. Oops. Do I have that setting off? We should be able to see that rubric right there. I have to look at that one more time. But yes, here's that rubric, I think, because I have this set. But this is an example where, you can play around with it and use preview user to see exactly how they're going to be see it. And see, I had inadvertently changed it back to no. So let me do that. Hopefully that works in the backwards way. Grades. So now they can see that the graded rubric, and it's very clear where they scored. And then I think they can also see, and then they can see the comments there. Okay, I'm looking at the chat. Any questions from there, and then I'll talk about importing and exporting. Do you walk your students how to view the rubrics in their grades, or can they figure it out on their own? Joyce or Taryn, do you have any experience with that?
I think that showing or having it depends on how experienced the students are. If it's in a lower level class, you definitely need to talk them through how they can find stuff in the assignments and in their grade book. But if it's an upper level class, they may have already done it before. So just, asking if they know where to find it and letting them know that it's there.
And I haven't done that, and I realized I should, so I will do that from now on. I told Joyce and Maegan when we met the other day to like plan this out. I'm like, I'm already learning from you all, so I'm going to learn from our workshop too.
Exactly. We all have different perspectives.
I have a quick question, Maegan. I did one of these, but it was for like just one little project, that I did in one of my classes. So to me, it was a lot of work. Like if you're doing 5 papers and they all basically have the same rubric, the investment in time was more worth it. But then when I used it the next semester, it was kind of nice that it was there. But I was using point ranges, because it was like a step-by-step Excel thing that students had to do. So there were like 20 steps. So like each step was, 0 to 5. And so basically if they did it, they got 5, but if they sort of, their chart didn't have everything in it or something looked weird. But I was trying to make a default like to the 5 per, so I didn't have to click 5 or type in 5 every time. And that would have really been nice, but I couldn't figure out I don't know if we can do that.
I don't recall a default like that, but
because most of them, did it. So it's like 5, 5, 5, 5, but it was like really annoying to keep.
I was trying to see, normally if you go to these little arrows and click edit, there are sometimes bonus settings that you can take advantage of. And I was hoping to see a default there.
Yeah, I kind of played around, but I thought maybe there's something I don't know about.
I don't think you're missing anything.
Okay.
I can certainly dig a little deeper and let you know if I find anything, but
okay.
I don't think there's a way to default to a different setting, but I don't know what you could. I'm trying to think of, I think it makes you select a setting, right? Or
what do you mean for whether you do points or?
Kathy, did you try making your ranges backwards, like 5 to 0 instead of 0 to 5?
I probably not.
That's where I was going.
You think it would let me do that?
I don't know, but that's worth trying, right?
Okay. But I think it didn't have any number in it, but I'll try it. I don't think it defaulted to 0 either. I think it's, I think I had to put something.
Yeah, I think you have to click every time, but I guess if you put the 5 first, it would be right there and you wouldn't have to scroll down. That was the only thing I could think of.
Yeah. I'll look at it.
And you can tab once you click on the first one, you can tab to the rest of them. So if it's the first thing, it might be faster anyway. Even though
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So wait, are you saying once I've made the assignment, I can't edit it, or once somebody's turned it in, I can't edit it?
What I have found is if you try to edit the rubric and if it's already attached to the assignment, and you've already, like students have already submitted, then I'm not able to edit that rubric. You could modify, like you can make a copy of it in the rubrics tool and assign that, attach that to a new assignment. But for the assignment that it's already attached to that students have submitted to, I don't think you can edit anymore.
Okay, I think that ship may have sailed for me this time then.
But if they haven't turned it in, you can still edit it.
I think one has, but I haven't graded it, but I think one has turned it in.
Sure, so. And I did just test really quickly so we could see if it defaults to a certain selection on the rubric, and unfortunately it does not look like it is doing that. So
so The point range, though, I think might be different because you've got to, I don't think you clicked on the numbers in the range. You probably had to
It's a
type. I
drop
don't know,
down. Yeah, it's a drop down.
Okay, yeah, that was, I would have rather even typed. I think the drop, yeah, but to
Yeah.
have it at the top of the drop down then would help a little, I guess, maybe. Okay,
There's got to be somewhere on Blackboard where they have improvements or suggestions.
yeah,
I'll have to see if that's a feature in their the Ultra course view.
Yeah.
They've been making a lot of improvements in that view to make it easier. So less clicks, things like that. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to show you before we run out of time very quickly is if you have one rubric that you want to, that you've created in one class and you want to transfer it to another class, you can go to the class where you created the rubric in, select it, and export it. So you'll notice you have the option to export to a local computer, which you can do. So to save it on your own device, and then you could later import that rubric. But what might be easier if you already have access to that, the new course you want to get this in, go to export to your content collection. And then it's just a matter of searching for your the new course. So this is just my test course ID for the course I'm in right now. I'm going to click back and I want it in this course, my Spanish 1 course. Hit submit. And now I'll be able to find that in my Spanish 1 course. And of course, I already did this once today, so it might be in there twice. But I think that was the right course. Might have done it in the wrong one. But moral of the story, that would be how you did that. I think I need to refresh it. Or I'll show you the other way too. You can import and the rubric file saves as a zip file. Do that there. Oh, you know what? Because I had opened that before. Sorry, let's try this. We'll export that to my local computer. And it downloads as the whole zip file. Oops, wrong one. Here. Zip. Oh no, rubric.
Yeah, and while Megan's demonstrating that, just one thing I'll say, since we're going to be running out of time here, I know some of us have to teach at 1, including me, is, I know that I'm very willing to share anything that you all saw today that might be helpful, whether it's the departmental rubrics or things I use in my individual classes. I'm guessing that Megan's very glad to meet with you when I've talked to Megan about all kinds of things already. We met just to talk about Teams one day. And Joyce has also, like I said, willingly shared things with the whole campus through the request of AEC, which we appreciate. So I'm always all about don't reinvent the wheel. I'm always glad to share information. And so please feel free. I'm also, you may have noticed, recording this, and I'll share the link with Denise, and the two of us can share it with the whole campus, so that if anyone was unable to attend, then they can catch up and see it later. And if anyone is like me and it helps you to go back and review things later, you'll be able to do that as well.
Yes. Thank you all. I'm sorry I fumbled through that. It's just a matter of don't open the zip file when you download it. Keep it all together in one and then import it. But there it is up there. And happy to answer any questions or anything else Blackboard related you have. I can research for you. I might not know the answer right away, but I will find the information.
My only last final words would be say, if you already have some criteria, you can easily adapt that to Blackboard. You don't have to have the full rubric with all the language, like Jen was asking about, like language for them. So if you don't have all the descriptors yet, but you have your criteria, you could set up like Kathy did, like the criteria with the range of points, right?
Mhm.
And then, so this semester, maybe you don't get the full benefit of having, be able to go a little faster with your grading, because you don't have all the descriptors, but you can get started using the rubrics and become more familiar with them in that way. So you can make it as less detail as you need, or as much detail as you would like in the rubrics.
Great. Thank you, presenters. This was wonderful.
Thanks for cooperating with us, collaborating, I should say, Denise. We really appreciate it. And I hope this was helpful for teaching as well as assessment.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks. Hey, Megan, I have can we meet or at least or talk? Do you have a minute after this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get on
Okay,
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, or I'm gonna
Yeah.
assign Megan to be the host and leave. If you all just want to keep chatting on here, you can do
You
that.
can stop. Are you recording still? 'Cause
I was gonna say, let's stop recording and then I am happy to.
yeah, because we're recording still. So nobody's going to want to hear it. Well, they may not.
Bye, Joyce.
Bye.
I'm gonna